everyone, today I'm going to do a video around the basics of 3D printing. I'm going to try and cover everything that I think you'll need to know in order to get started in 3D printing. So in this video I'm going to talk about what 3D models you need and where to get them. I'm going to talk about slicers and what they are, what they do, and then I'm going to talk about the importance of bed leveling. Okay guys, so 3D printable files come in two main formats. There is STL and OBJ. Now neither of these are particularly different from each other, they're both just different file extensions for three-dimensional models. Now you can either design your own models and print them using a CAD program such as Tinkercad or Fusion 360 or any other of the many available CAD programs that are out there. Or you can go to a website such as Thingiverse or Yegi or My Mini Factory and download a file that someone has uploaded there. So a file that I would recommend printing as maybe a first print is this 3D Benchy. Now it might just look like a little boat, but the great thing about this is that it actually benchmarks your 3D printer, hence the Benchy name. So it can show you where you need to maybe improve your settings, where your printer could be improved, and all sorts of other things. So what you need to do is on Thingiverse is find the file that you want to print and then head down to the Thing Files section. Now this model's been split up into many pieces so that if you had a multi-material extruder you could do it in multiple colours, multiple filaments and everything like that. But for now we'll just keep it simple and stick with the standard Benchy STL. So I've already downloaded that here, and we will import that into our slicer. Now the slicer that I use is called Cura, and in my opinion it's the better one of the few that are out there. So you have ones such as Slick 3R and S3D and probably more that I'm failing to mention, but Cura is just the one that I've always used and it works for me, so if it isn't broken then I don't need to fix it really, do I? So in Cura, as you can see, I've already loaded up my Benchy in here, but if you want to load in any files, you just click this little open file icon here and then browse through your files and select the STL file that you've downloaded. I'll then bring it into this 3D printing plane, and if it's your first time opening Cura, you'll be asked to set up a printer. Now it's quite simple to do. If you have a model that is already has a profile set up for it, great, you really don't need to do much. Obviously there's loads of other non-Ultimaker ones here as well, but if you have one that's not in the list, then just select custom, name it whatever it is, and just put in the settings as they are. You should be able to get this from the website that you purchased the printer from. Most of the information tends to be listed under there under the specifications. So most of the time when you start Cura, you'll be met with this very simple, very basic sort of layout and very few settings. I would recommend switching to the custom settings as it gives you a lot more flexibility and a lot more to tweak. So for this model I'm going to print at a 0.2 layer height. Now your layer height is how large of a increment that the Z axis is going to go up whilst it's printing. So for a 0.2 millimeter, it's going to be slightly rough. If the model doesn't need to be absolutely smooth, then I would recommend doing 0.2 all the time. You don't want to go above 75% of your nozzle diameter for the layer height. So for example, if I was using a 0.4 millimeter nozzle, which I am, I would not recommend going higher than a 0.3 layer height, as this can cause a few issues down the line. So once we've got the layer height sorted, we'll move on to shell. So the shell is essentially the outer parts of your print, so the bits that are actually going to be seen by you. Now it's important that you have at least two walls, because if you have one, then it's going to make the print very fragile on the outside. Two walls gives it that extra little bit of stability that you might want. If things need to be stronger, if it needs to be a lot more resistant to just sort of general pressures and things like that on the outside, you might want to up this to maybe have it a millimeter thick or a 1.2 millimeter thick wall if you're using a 0.4 millimeter nozzle.
And a similar story for the top and bottom thickness. It's just all about how strong you need that print to be. Less layers, it'll be weaker. More layers, it'll be stronger. So the infill density is also a contributing factor to the overall strength of the print. If the model doesn't need to be, again, if it doesn't need to be strong, I'd say don't bother printing it with a high infill, because it's just a waste of filament. If all it's going to do is sit there and not be tested in any way, then I'd say an infill of 10 to 20% is great. And the infill pattern, you know, there are so many different things you can choose here. Each one's probably got its own pros and cons, but I'm just going to keep it simple, and we'll stick with a grid pattern. So to help you visualize what that looks like, if I just go through the layers here, you can see that as it's building up at the top of this chimney stack, you can see that it's hollow in the middle at some points, and this is basically just to save plastic. If the boat doesn't need to be fully it doesn't need to be a solid model, then just use infill. It saves you so much plastic. So the material here, this is where you set the temperature settings for your extruder and your build plate if you've got a heated build plate. Now I've made a video on making sure that you get the best printing temperature for your filaments, and I'll leave a little note for that. So if you want to go and watch that, that'll help you decide how to get the filament to the best temperature, how to select the best temperature for your filament. So I'll just leave those for now. So this print speed, you probably want to set to between 50 and 70. It really depends on the printer. Again, most of these will be listed on the specification on the website that you purchased it from. Most tend to be 50 or 60, so either of those will do. Just bear in mind that if you lower the speed, then the print will take longer, because the extruder, the nozzle isn't moving as fast, so it's not putting out as much plastic in the same sort of speed. So cooling, I would recommend cooling if you're using PLA, because it just helps the overall print quality improve, and it helps the layer by layer process build up. Support. Now, if you have a print that has a lot of overhang, so for example, if you were going to print a tree that has a lot of outstanding branches, you would want to make sure that you click support material, because what this essentially does is it will lay down filament and create an almost shelf for the printer to print on later. Because if the way that FDM 3D printing works, it's not physically possible to print in thin air. So you can see here it's making these in the middle of the chimney stack. It's making these supports here for this the roof of the chimney stack, and that's not actually required on this model. It's stated in the description that you don't need supports, but this is a really important thing to bear in mind. If you're doing more complex prints that do have overhanging parts, you will need support material, but like I say, for this model we don't need it, so we'll leave that for now. Now, arguably one of the most important things about 3D printing is the build plate adhesion. Now, if you have a model that has a fairly large surface area that is on the bed, so for example, you see here the whole bottom of this benchy is on the build plate, then you won't need anything more than a skirt. Now, I would never recommend printing with nothing, but I would always recommend printing with a skirt if you have a large surface area on the build plate. So the skirt is this little outline here, and what that does is it just prints the outline and it primes the nozzle, so that once it is ready to move on to your actual model that you're wanting to print, it's not going to have any issues with under extrusion or anything like that. It's going to be fully ready to kick out the model that you want. So if you had, for example, a model that had a low surface area that was touching the build plate, I'd definitely recommend using either a brim or a raft, as these just give that extra little bit of bed adhesion. So you can see when the print loads, you'll see that the lines on the outer of the print now go all the way to the print model. So again, this just gives it a bit more surface area to the build plate and helps it stick throughout the print. So once we've selected all these settings, we can then save it to our SD card or send it through USB to our printer and hit print. And now, before we do any of that, we just need to make sure that the build plate on our printer is fully level and is just absolutely perfect, because if it's not, then we're going to have a whole heap of bed adhesion issues and all sorts of things like that. So let's go and see how we do that.
Okay, so for leveling the build plate, you basically want to take a piece of card or paper and make sure that you can slide that between the nozzle and the build plate and feel just a little bit of pull between the two. You don't want to have it so sort of clamped that you can barely pull it, or that it takes a lot of effort to pull it, and at the same time you don't want it to fully slide under and feel absolutely nothing. You just got to make sure that you get it absolutely right. And on most printers, they just have little dials on the screws that you turn to tighten and move the bed up or down in either position.
Round and round we go, losing self-control. I keep telling myself, but I don't want to let you know. Is this what we become? Strangers on the run, looking for something, chasing the sun. All those days, trying to find a place that you won't make them just be alone, alone. All those nights, lying by your side, like it's a vibe, feeling it shine under your spotlight.
So there you go guys, there's my benchy that I printed out. It didn't come out great, there's a few areas that I'm going to have to work on. It appeared I didn't have the bed level, you can barely even see the text on the bottom, so I'll definitely have to work on getting that level. There's a little bit of wobbling, so I'll work on that as well. But other than that, the print completed, so it's sort of a success. But either way, if you print this yourself, you can see where your printer needs improvement and you'll know what areas that you need to tackle. Thank you for watching this video guys. If it helped, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. Leave any comments you have down below and I will hopefully see you in the next video. Cheers.